Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today we have a special video about something very interesting that leaked on the internet but that few channels have commented on. We're going to talk about a game from the Need for Speed franchise which isn't actually one of the best in the series, but which at the time attempted to return the series to its roots in the underground world of street racing. I'm talking about Need for Speed, the 2015 reboot. But I'm not going to talk about the game itself, but rather about its development and why it's so interesting. Without further ado, let's get to the video because we have a lot to talk about. Before we start talking about the game's reboot, let's talk a little more about the context of the time when the game was released. Needless to say, the franchise was going through one of the worst periods in its history, as it was in the middle of an identity crisis. It had been through years of experimentation, from pure sim racing games like Shift to linear action games like The Run. But that began to change with the release of Need for Speed Rivals in 2013 for the 7th and 8th generation of consoles. After years of changes in the franchise being worked on by different developers, in 2013, Ghost Games released its first game of the Need for Speed franchise, right after Most Wanted being released by Criterion in 2012. Ghost Games was an EA subsidiary that began producing games in 2011, but had artists in the studio who had worked for other large companies and on several other racing franchises such as Forza Horizon and Project Gotham Racing. So did they know what they were doing right? And yes, we found out that they were indeed talented. The game Need for Speed Rivals was actually good, considering the phase the franchise was in at the time, of course. But it got a score of 80 on Metacritic and was mainly praised for its open world and its police chases that looked a lot like action movies. So it was obvious that after years of games being considered weak by fans, having a good game helped a lot in ensuring that this new franchise developer would continue making the next games in the series. And that's what happened. For the first time in decades, EA skipped 2014 without a major release for the franchise. The goal? Well, trying to listen to the community clamoring for a spiritual sequel to the underground games. Probably the first games many of us played in the series. And I don't even need to mention their quality, right? Well, along with the anticipation, also appeared the pressure to deliver a good game. And well, unfortunately, that didn't happen. The game was released simply as Need for Speed. That's right, no subtitles. Released for PS4, Xbox One and PC, the premise of this game was tough. It was developed to redefine the pillars of the night street racing atmosphere, even being considered as a reboot for the entire series. But, well, it didn't work. With a Metacritic score of 66, this game clearly wasn't even half of what fans wanted. It was heavily criticized for being too repetitive. It even tried to have a story like the old Need for Speed games, but well, it didn't work because it was just too boring. And of course, another negative point was its setting, which, even though it had good graphics for the time, the city was really empty, lacking details and changes of scenery, basically looking like an unfinished game. So essentially, everything Rivals tried to do with the franchise, this reboot went and basically redid, bringing the entire franchise back to the rock bottom again. But what if I told you that it could have been different, and that this game could actually have been much more ambitious than it was? What you are seeing now is a pre-alpha version of the Need for Speed reboot. And do you know what's most interesting about all this? It's running on a PS3 emulator, something strange since it was never released for the 7th generation of consoles. But let's explain more about this build. First of all, it was found on a PS3 development unit, which not only had this prototype, but also had old beta builds of Need for Speed Most Wanted from 2012, which will be the subject of a future video. It only has test maps without any textures and uses the same game engine, handling, and even the HUD used in Need for Speed Rivals. So we can now confirm that the game was based on the previous one. In fact, when you run the game on the emulator, it appears as Rivals itself. So how can we be sure that this build is actually from the reboot game? Well, the only way to confirm this is the name of the build itself, which is Genesis Pre-Prod. And we know that Genesis was the code name used in the development phase for this particular game, with even some files from the final version still referring to this code name, as you can see here. And what can you do with this game? Basically, you can drive using cars from the Rivals game around two different maps, one called Test Level Santa Monica and the other called Ronnie Pre-Prod. First, let's talk about the test map called Ronnie Pre-Prod. It's a map of what looks like a small district, which I honestly didn't find to resemble anything in the retail version of the game or any real city. I think it was only used for testing certain things like how the cars handled. But if you spot any similarities between this map width and the retail version, please share your thoughts in the comments. The Santa Monica level is definitely the most interesting. It's a pretty big map based on Santa Monica area in Los Angeles. It's interesting because Ventura Bay, the city in the retail version, resembles some parts of Los Angeles since it was based on it. But it's got virtually the same layout here. It seems like they plan to include a whole area of Santa Monica City in the game at some point. For example, as the name says, this map includes the Santa Monica Beach, as you can see here. I know, it's strange because you don't have water. Anyway, when you compare this map to the Santa Monica one, you'll see that almost an entire area aligns with the city's layout. To show this, I'll compare the real life footage with the one captured in this build. First, I went to the California Incline and then Ocean Avenue. You can see that the avenue is basically a straight road, but you can also see the streets intersections in both the game and its real life counterpart. Another place I wanted to show you is the Chautauqua Boulevard area. It's a more residential part of the city. When you compare the game's aerial view with the actual Google Earth map, you'll see that the layout is practically identical. The game even maintains the area's residential houses, without textures of course. Just to be clear, I haven't had the chance to visit Santa Monica in person yet, only playing GTA 5 or Midnight Club Los Angeles. If you'd like to help me with that, feel free to get in touch. So, it's pretty obvious that when they were planning the game, they wanted a much larger city, maybe even a copy of Los Angeles. Who knows? That would be great, wouldn't it? Another thing is that, as mentioned before, we can see cars from Need for Speed Rivals, and the handling is the same by default. However, if you access the debug menu, you will find options for cars with different handling. One option in particular is called Drift Extreme. I admit that I don't have the ability to test this correctly, but you can see that this handling is a blend of the one found in Rivals and the 2015 reboot. Right away you feel the car heavier, and if you brake, it starts doing an impossible drift, just like in the Final Drift type cars. Finally, I found one last oddity in the game files. This build has the original Rivals game in its retail version with a debug menu. However, when I tried it, I encountered several bugs, mainly graphics related, which are probably caused by the emulator itself. Anyway, an interesting thing is that many files are named HP2. This leads us to believe that Need for Speed Rivals was originally going to be Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2, a direct sequel to the reboot released in 2010. So we ended getting a lot of beta informations from basically two games. Cool, right? Did you know anything else interesting about this build? Have you found any other interesting beta builds of games? Write your thoughts in the comments. So that's it guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to like it and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching, see you in the next video.